Hi. Yeah. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I'll be entertaining POIs through the chat. Before I start my speech, congrats to Thomasers for reaching this far. Hope we have a wonderful debate. Yeah. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, a government is there by the people, for the people, of the people, not to slaughter people, right? If you haven't guessed already, our stance in itself is democracy as a whole, right? Before I move on to any substantives, a few contextualizations and characterizations that need to be done to avoid any misconceptions, right? We as proposition are by no means saying that the Houthi terrorist organization is a saintful, pure, immaculate organization, right? We by no means are saying that we want Houthi to come and govern Yemen as a whole. And we are not telling, we're just telling that they hold more legitimacy in comparison to the government, right? We're simply making a comparison over here with strategic observation and facts and figures, right? So opposition should not have the fear to come up and give us arguments saying that the disadvantages of Houthi role or so on and so forth, right? The other incentive of a contextualization is we believe that Yemen as a state should be more responsible in handling state affairs in democracy as a whole. Otherwise, it wouldn't have led to this sort of situation, right? A few words that needs to be clarified. Legitimacy is sort of allowed, the things which are allowed by law. Democracy, reasonability, these are stuffs which are interconnected, right? Now, an evident fact over here as neither entities are democratic as a whole, not the terrorist organization, not the government as a whole, right? So the idea, the question in this debate is which side is more legitimate than the other entity, which side is more democratic than the other entity. That is where the cut need to be made, right? And a few things that caught my eye is government proclaimed, right? Mainly that this terrorist organization is not proclaimed by the UN Security Council of the UN as an international terrorist organization. The government of Yemen has only labeled this organization as a terrorist organization. More on the Houthi in my arguments, right? 3 arguments for the House today. Number 1 on the motive of the government. Number 2 is minority rights. And number 3 is the post-motion part. On a first level of analysis, we tell you that there is a supposed motive of the government, right? The motive of the government is to have democracy, is to have the supremacy of law, is to have the equality before law, right? We understand that the government is in itself inherently bestowed with this obligation, bestowed with this responsibility to fulfill democracy to the highest extent. Given the fact that Yemen identifies as a democratic nation, given the fact that Yemen identifies as a republic amidst the international sort of territory in the international field, we believe that this motive of the government is only supposed because Yemen as a whole the government as a whole is not fulfilling their role as a government, which is quite evident in the info slide as well, right? On a second level of analysis, we bring you the violation of rights, ladies and gentlemen, right? As I told you, it is the primary obligation of the government to protect every single individual's rights which reside at civilians unless they have limited rights by the law, right? The government has no right whatsoever to violate another person's right, whatever the right it is, right? Given that the government has violated the most fundamental, the most supreme right there is, we believe that they have failed as a government as a whole, right? Because the motion or the info slide never said that the civilians were killed were part of the terrorist organization, which allows us to assume that the civilians which were killed are innocent civilians which do have the right to life, civilians which do have the right to exist in society, but the government has taken this genocidal step to violate this sort of civilians, right? And the facts speak for itself, right? This is not my opinion. The UN statistics itself says that this terrorist organization has killed twice the people as the Houthi as whole, right? So ladies and gentlemen, understand that the Geneva Declaration is something that all governments need to decide to, as long as they identify as a democratic nation. And this Geneva Declaration has become a suggestion now, and it's become a choice for the government to sort of exercise the supremacy of law, exercise the protection of rights on certain people, on their allies, and on innocent civilians, maybe opposing the government, maybe centrists, to sort of violate their rights. So you need to get this understanding on who is the real terrorist in this type of situation, who is the real entity that violates purpose, and who is the entity which is legitimate as a whole. That is our sort of point of view as a proposition here. Before I move on to my second argument, I'll take a point. Clearly
Yes.
not. Yeah, I'll take a point, sir.
As legitimacy would mean legitimacy to govern the country, how would you make Yemen flourish in an instance where you don't legitimize the Houthi to govern Yemen?
No, here's the idea, right? As I told you, legitimacy is not governing a country. Legitimacy is concluding an action allowed by law. Legitimacy is being reasonable. Legitimacy is democratic, right? We are not proposing that the Houthi should govern Yemen as a whole. Let me read you the motion again, Speaker. This House believes that Houthi holds more legitimacy than the current government. Not this House believes that Houthi should govern Yemen, not the government of Yemen should sort of drop down as a government, right? They're just making this logical comparison on which entity violates rights more, and then figuring out who's more legitimate here. Because understand, again, as I told you, both entities are violating rights. Both entities are illegitimate to a certain extent. Right? The debate is between which side is more legitimate, and us as proposition, our burden of proof is to show you that the Houthi is legitimate, right? I hope I answered your point. Second argument then is minority rights. So on the first level of analysis, we tell you the motive of the Houthi. The motive of the Houthi is to protect minority rights of Shia Islams, meaning that the motive that they so their sole inherent obligation is to ensure that this minority gets to practice their religious rights. Okay, on the second level of analysis, we tell you that this is also visible evidence that the Yemen government doesn't allow minorities to practice their right of religion, right? The emergence of the Houthi as a terrorist organization as a whole gives you visible evidence that the government of Yemen, again violating human rights, again not allowing Shia Muslims to sort of to exercise their rights as a whole, right? On a third level of analysis, we tell you the reason for revolting, right? Since this is an insurgent group, we tell you since this is an uprising group, the reason for Houthi to revolt may be the primary sole reason that the government is not allowing them to practice their religious right fundamentally, which is a fundamental right again, right? So we believe that the government is violating rights, two rights in majority. Number one is the supreme right of life, and the second one is the right to practice religion, right? So literally, this democratic nation is coming to the standard of North Korea, in which you cannot say a word against the government or the government is going to prosecute you. It has come to the standard of Iran, where you cannot say something against the government or the government is going to prosecute you, right? You understand, then they're going to violate the right of speech, the right of sort of freedom, thought, and conscience, right? These are multiple right violations that are happening, right? It is sort of justifiable because terrorist groups inherently, so since they are labeled as a terrorist organization, for them to violate rights, but by no means it is absolutely not justifiable whatsoever for the government identifying as a republic nation to violate at least a single person's right of life, nonetheless violating like twice the people, committing genocide as a whole, right? So you understand, this in itself is enough to identify which entity is more legitimate. This in itself is enough. When we have the comparison, just think about the question that which side violates human rights more. You'll get the answer onto which side is legitimate. We are by no means telling that the Houthi should govern. We are by no means telling that the Houthi is immaculate. We're just telling that they're just more legitimate than the existing so-called democratic government, right? For all those reasons, side with side proposition.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Now I would like to invite the leader of opposition to start the case on their side. Here.
Can I be seen and heard?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Cool. Great. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel. In the long run, the best revolution cannot outweigh a democratic government. Notice that the only people to keep the citizens in check is the government, even if it is the interference in the short run. But this debate is not about which government is better, but which is more legitimate. However, also legitimacy is subjective. And we believe that a democratical government is the only way to keep these rebels checks and balance. So this Houthi government is not actually like a government. Proposition comes up and claims that, oh, look, that they are the ones who better society and we have killed so many people. But what we tell you is their side will do something far more extreme. Because, let's say, let me elaborate onto my rebuttal. Firstly, proposition says how to have a more democratic government. However, I disagree with this. For democracy is desirable in itself as the best system of the government. Despite its obvious flaws, any other system is bound to be worse. It ensures that governments are held accountable to their people, guards against corruption, protects individual liberties, and allows flawed policies to be corrected. Economies are more likely to be open, competitive, and prosperous. If we believe in these benefits, we should promote them vigorously to others. My second response to this, democracy is not a purely domestic issue, as it tends to produce governments that cooperate internationally. There has never been a war between two democracies. So notice that these governments have been elected by the people because of the policies they promote, and that is the reason governments are there. And to impeach a government is not ideal at all. In fact, it is subpar. What's the counter model? Our counter model is that a legally appointed government will be incentivized to find workable solutions to the country's problem through activism and the devolution of power. Our stance is that we believe that over the long haul, legally appointed government has the interest at hand, even if it is ineffective in the short run. Let me redefine and characterize this motion. Legitimacy is the cornerstone of any political system. It enables the government institutions to rule, enforce the law, and have a representative in the UN. That being said, we have three main arguments for the House. The first two will be dealt by me, and the third will be dealt by Anish. First argument then, on to like which side betters the clemency, the legitimacy of the people. Now, firstly, we tell you that there is no doubt that not everyone consents to the state, but that is because to demand that they do would be an absurd requirement for the state's legitimacy. Rather, there is a need for everyone to play by a common set of rules in order to ensure that basic outcomes like enforcement of the law and fair distribution. Firstly, we tell you of goods can be achieved. Everyone should opt to act by the principle of fair play. If anarchists purport to be moral, then they should be favored to the outcome of mutually beneficial cooperation, right? Secondly, we tell you, the answer to the problem of a UN democratic democracy is reform, not anarchy. Democracies can be made more representative through devolution, proportional representation, and increased use of the referendum. The power relations that are the subject of complaint will inevitably also manifest themselves in the basically anarchic state. Rich elites will simply buy themselves private armies or gather all means of production. This time, however, there will not be any means to temper those forces through the benevolent force of the state. The balance of power will be gone entirely, and this is something we do not want. Rather than do away with the state entirely, less rigorous solutions are available to curb the power of the state. Second argument then, my practical argument is on why it is harmful to delegitimize and democratically elected government. Why is this important? This is important because people have elected the people. People have elected them based on their policies, based on their rhetoric and what they have said, and based on real factors. There is no reason for the Houthi government to just impeach these people, these Houthi rebels to impeach these people, because what we're saying is our side is a better alternative. But before I move on to my second argument, before I move on to my second response, I'll take POI. Seeing none, second response. It will be like the survival of the fittest, and the most capable will try to take power. Because that's the side proposition is promoting, and a side we are trying to completely avoid. Thirdly, we tell you that there will be protests which will leave the less powerful to the exploited, and these are the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate. The people who have been marginalized are the voters who have voted for these governments. We tell you because these protests are going to happen because they have elected a government and they do not expect that government to be impeached through aggression. At best, they'll have microaggressions. At worst, they'll be fully fledged riots. Next, I'm going to talk about so what does side proposition promote? They promote alternative groups to come instead of a government. We tell you the government is the only fundamental democratic to keep these people in checks and balances, because they are the people who they want to protect. They are the most vulnerable stakeholders, the citizens. So we tell you, when you harm these citizens by the Houthi law, we tell you, then there's no one to keep them in check. Next, we talk to you, side proposition takes the right to vote away, because now there'll be extreme groups such as the government who might not be democratic at all, who may just come in because of rhetoric and because of people's beliefs. But we tell you, they need to prove this, and they need to come in through their policies, which a government can do. So on an even if level, even if the proposition states this motion would be beneficial to the immediate upliftment of the Yemen's people, we tell you, we believe it pales in comparison to what will occur if this motion is put forth, which is that it would result in harm of hurting the most vulnerable stakeholders and the crux of democracy, and that is something principally unjust. If side proposition can't see this, we believe that we won this debate from the get-go. For all these reasons, we urge you to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to carry forward the case on government side. Here.
Am I visibly and audibly clear?
Yeah, clear.
Okay. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I would like to entertain all POIs through the chat, and I'll be starting my case in 3, 2, 1, go. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, today we have a side opposition who did not understand the contextualization that my first speaker stated, which is that we would be considering the Houthis more legitimate at this point because due to the actions taken by the government of Yemen that has resulted in twice the civilian deaths of the Houthis. So why does this happen? To go into this fact that first I will start with my rebuttals, and my first one is that the first speaker of side opposition stated that democratic rights are violated by outside. First of all, sir, there's a whole going on that democracy is 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting to decide what we get for dinner. So at this point, there are Shia sect of Islam, and there's the majority of the Yemen populace. And Houthi was a result of the violation of rights of the Shia sect of Islam. So considering this fact, this clearly draws parallel to the fact that Hitler was also voted in by a majority, and he genocided the Jewish populace inside 1940s Germany. So as we go on into this topic, we realize that democracy has become invalid because there's a disproportionate majority wanting an ethno-state, a kind of ethno-religious state for themselves, and not giving other religions rights for them to practice it properly. As my first speaker said, religious rights are completely violated. Then you went on to talk about how we are putting some government that might not be democratic to govern a country. So first of all, we are only giving them legitimacy for now because of the actions of the Yemeni government up to this point, which is a civilian death, and statistics speak for them itself. Because we have to make sure that Yemen, a democratically elected government, should be held accountable for their actions and not given free course. Because look at the Houthis. They are, you yourself stated that they might be unjust, but they haven't killed as many as the Yemeni government. The motion itself states that. So we have to think about this. We have to think about this in the point of the minority who's at the disadvantage, and we should resolve this issue without bloodshed, without furthermore bloodshed, and we should resolve this in a more civilized manner than saying, okay, the Houthis are bad, let's not. Government would come in and say, okay, we would not be committing genocide on this minority of people that exist within our country, and that we would be focused on giving them the equal rights to every citizen in the country as well. Now, as I stated this, we are not any means stating that this is the Houthis are really good people, saint-like characters, and they might also be wrong. But at this point of the debate, we realize that the most civilian casualties, the most civilian deaths are on the hands of the Yemeni government. So as side proposition, we see this as a clear human rights violation, and we would protect the rights for everyone inside the country, deciding that and this proves that our side is more democratic, and we are expecting the Yemeni government to be accountable, and they would in the end give the people all rights equally. Is there any POIs? Seeing that there are none, I would move on. And going into the fact that we also expect the Houthis to come into an agreement, because they might think, okay, the international countries are saying, okay, we are legitimate, we are more trustworthy, we are like, we are trustworthy, we are legitimate. They are thinking that they would be like, okay, we could at the end of the day, we could come to a solution together with the Yemeni government, because they are at a disadvantage now. Seeing that these two entities, the stakeholders, the main stakeholders are the Yemeni government, the Houthi, and the people who are getting slaughtered in the front lines, our side grants more rights to everyone, and we are going to make sure that every action would be held accountable by the people who have done it, by the stakeholders who have done it. And our model is to actually in the long run get the Yemeni government to distribute more rights to the people, and ensure religious rights in the country. And and I urge the judge to side with side proposition, because we are looking at this from an unbiased point, and we are seeing that we are providing an equal solution to all the stakeholders of this case. With that, I urge the judge to side with side proposition, and I will conclude my speech. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Now I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to carry forward the case on opposition side. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, clear.
Yeah, good. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. So far, this debate is like a ball of string. It has got tangled so much just because side proposition fails to understand what legitimacy truly is and how the premise works. So proud to oppose. A couple of things before I move on to my rebuttals, right? Let me clarify to Side Proposition's third speaker on what exactly this legitimacy looks like, right? Legitimacy is basically this cornerstone where, like Side Proposition first speaker mentioned, where you democratically vote, you democratically choose, and they violate that legitimacy when the Houthis sort of have more legitimacy, right? Because first of all, the Houthis don't have the citizens sort of democratical vote. They neither have the citizens' opinions to come into play. Therefore, we believe what they said so far doesn't make a lot of sense. And another thing before I move on. If government has violated more than one right, like they claim, then they are most probably going to be held accountable by a court of law. In this instance, another form of government comes up and takes the government of Yemen, but not sort of a terrorist organization like the Houthis. Moving on to my thematic rebuttal. I have two main thematic rebuttal in this debate. The motive of the government and the main point they were sort of running on both their speakers, minority rights. Moving on to the first point, the motive of the government. They came up and talk about this democracy and how on their side they are sort of having this democracy. The thing I have to clarify with Side Proposition is whether these people are sort of, whether the government violated more than two or more rights. What happens is they're more legitimate because of the fact that they have been voted in by the citizens, right? They've been voted in by Yemeni citizens. Therefore, they're more legitimate in all aspects. But the Houthi, on the other hand, might have this support from a minority group, but those groups aren't, but still they aren't legitimate because of the fact that there is no democracy in the way they are going to be appointed. Then they come up and tell us, because of one statistic that the UN shows on how Yemen sort of killed more people and the Houthis didn't kill as much people, they come up and tell us these people are probably going to have more, probably going to have a better internal democracy structure. We tell you this is completely wrong. When we look at the ISIS, people thought at the beginning they were just this Islam terrorist, this group that have been there in order to promote the rights of these Islam communities. But it turned out to be something else. In the same way, when you have when the sort of these small terrorist organizations get a lot of right, when they are legitimized, as Side Proposition tells you, then it creates massive problems, and I'll further analyze that in my debate. At the end of this rebuttal, what we can see is that legitimacy isn't there on their side because of the sole fact that Side Proposition first speaker completely, I quote him, he said legitimacy is basically government, people having the right to democratically vote, etc. Right? Because of this, we believe legitimacy isn't there on their side. Moving on to my second thematic rebuttal, minority rights. We don't necessarily see how this works, right? Because they come up and throw a couple of words there, look here, Islam, this thing, but they don't tell us how it happened. They don't tell us the mechanism. Look here, every apple has two sides, right? One side has this thing and another side tells a couple of stories. But the thing is, there's probably two sides to these stories where these minorities violated these rights. That is why they might have been put to jail or whatever. And we tell you, these should be they should mechanize this and come up and sort of tell us this exactly in a more defined way, right? Before I move on to my argument, the final thing I want to point out is that they don't have democracy, which means they don't have legitimacy. Moving on to our third argument. Before I move on to my third argument, a strategic observation in their case. They don't give us a third argument. They don't give us enough analysis in their rebuttals. Neither do they attack our main points in our case. Therefore, we can see still our analysis and our arguments stand in this house. Moving on to our third argument, the drastic measures the Houthis take in order to legitimize their power. No, thank you, sir. I'll take your POI later. What does this look like? the Houthis will sort of have no elections in order to legitimize their power, because one, they know for a fact that because they, without democracy, they came up and took a government, they won't allow elections. And another thing is, we can see when we go into a bit more depth, that the Houthis sort of took over the government and kept the president hostage so they can sort of justify and legitimize their rules. And this is a drastic measures that they are taking. On the best case, there might be stuff like about these Houthis sort of not being able to handle a country, but on the worst case, it's going to be massive genocide, and they can't sort of ignore that fact, right? And another point is on how a government is, under the no elections point, how a government is made legitimized is when the people in the government, when the citizens in the government decide whether or not these people are suitable enough to step into government, right? And it's at this point they will. It is the government's responsibility to choose wisely when voting, and just because the government doesn't sort of just because these people don't like the way these government are doing their stuff now, we tell you, then they can't sort of say these governments are aren't legit, and they should sort of kick them out. We gave you an alternative, right? We told you that, look here, if these governments aren't, if you aren't satisfied with them, if they have broken 2 or more laws, you are fine with them going to court and going and getting a new government, or getting the opposing party to come and sit in chair. We're not fine with an illegit organization taking over because of the sole fact that they haven't, they don't have much. They don't have as much as rights, they don't have much as legitimacy that the opposition party in the government might have. At the end of the day, what side proposition told us is sort of shoots them in the foot, right? It's because of the fact that legitimacy needs to be there in order for democracy needs to be there in order for a country to in order for a government to be legit, right? And we sort of have this legitimacy because of the sole fact that on our side, voting and these governments have been voted in. Let me weigh this debate and weigh the metrics and show our path to victory. On our side, what we do is we basically now have democratic elections. We are giving an alternative if these governments aren't performing well, as well as we're showing these Houthis what is wrong. Therefore, we believe on our side, we're sort of benefiting all the citizens in Yemen, as well as we're sort of creating a better, more unity and a harmonized state. I urge the panel to side with side opposition.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I would like to request the government whip to end the substantive case on their side. Here.
Yeah, am I visibly as well as audibly clear?
Yes.
Okay, my preferred pronouns are he and him. I'll accept POIs through the chat. Yeah, and you can start the timer in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, everyone present in this room at the moment, I just like you all to picture this in your minds for a second, okay? According to what side opposition has given to us today as their argument and their model, as long as I was elected democratically and I'm now part of the democratically elected government voted by the people of the country or the state, I can do whatever I want. I can drop a bomb on a temple. I can go and rape women. I can go with child abuse. I can use the economy for the country's money enough and more for my own personal greedy will as much as I want. And I'll still be legitimate, because as long as I'm voted by the people of the country, I am still legitimate and legal. And so no one can press charges against me, because I am supposed to be this epitome of democracy just because I was voted by a majority of people. This is the kind of case that side opposition gives to to us, okay? Because they are the kind, because opposition is the kind of side that would rather accept a Nazi Germany as a legitimate state just because they were voted in democratically. Hitler was voted in democratically. That does not mean Hitler is good. That does not mean he represents legitimacy. Okay, first of all, let's get that out of the way. Now then, first few points of rebuttal before I move on to my clash points. Okay, one thing we'd like to clear up that we mentioned throughout all our speeches so far, we are by no means saying that the government should be deposed of, and then suddenly Houthi should come and become the new de facto government of the country without any voting. No, we never said that. The question of the debate is which of these two parties, the Yemen government or the government proclaimed terrorist organization named as Houthi, which one of these are more legitimate? This, ladies and gentlemen, is the question of the debate, not who should be governing that country, which is why we are not going to walk into the gray area, because it does not concern us in this debate. But as you can see, side opposition's entire case, all of their arguments hinge on us deposing the government and or making Houthi or some other terrorist organization the new government of the country. Seeing as this is what all their above substances were based upon, we can clearly say their case has crumbled. Let me elaborate this further through my clash points. Okay, two major clash points for the House today, okay, from side opposition. The first one being which side, which house actually values the rights of all the minorities and the community as a whole more. The second being which house upholds democracy more. Okay, now moving on to the first clash point. Okay, side opposition brought in this whole case. Okay, the opposition's second speaker came up and told that legitimacy, like I mentioned earlier, he started his speech saying this whole legitimacy is this cornerstone of what is supposed to be legal, of what is supposed to be reasonable, what is supposed to be considered as democratic in the country. And then, okay, now let me just ask you this. So do you think that just because people voted them, now this is not something that we are coming and throwing out in the air out of nowhere, okay? The UN stats clearly say that even though this terrorist organization has supposedly killed a number of people, the government in question has almost killed twice as many. So keeping that in mind, do you really think the people will think of the government that has killed twice as many of the population? We're not talking about the people who supported this terrorist organization per se. It says civilians, innocent people who had the right to life, like my first speaker mentioned from the get-go. Okay, so do you really think the people of this country would picture this government that killed this many people double the amount as this terrorist organization as the people who they want to be governed by? Okay, we're not saying put the terrorist organization in charge. We're just saying the government clearly does not value rights, does not uphold democracy, and is definitely not as legitimate as this terrorist organization in this context at this point of time. Okay, now then one thing that they came to say was, another thing he said, he said that we as side population just came out and put this one statistic. Now that is a very peculiar wording, ladies and gentlemen. When you say one statistic, you understand what he's meaning. What he's referring to is the number of people that they have killed. Okay, so you're just saying, say the Houthi organization killed 100 people. So that means the government had killed at least approximately 190 people, since it's close to double. So I was just going to say one statistic is 190 people's deaths. Just put it out there like that. You can make an argument sound very vague like that. Okay, we're talking about people's lives here. Okay, so considering that is the statistic, you really think that people will still consider them the more legitimate? Because like we mentioned earlier in our argument, as the motive of the government is their actual supposed motive is to protect all rights, not any rights in particular, all rights including minority rights, which is why we can clearly see that in the arguments they do not value the minority rights as much. Okay, one of the things they came up and told us was that minorities violated rights, and this is why the government is forced to see Houthi as a terrorist organization. Now then, one thing we'd like to say here, okay, most of these terrorist organizations arise because the minorities' rights were violated from the beginning itself. And even if it wasn't, that doesn't give the government any right to kill innocent civilians, because it does not explicitly say that these are civilians these are people who follow this certain organization. We're talking about people who could have had nothing to do with the organization or the terrorist organization at all. Okay, and then another thing that they brought up was that we are going to be taking election out of the equation. And like we said before in our model, since it does not concern here, because we're not talking talking about electing a terrorist organization per se to govern the country anymore. That point does not stand at all. They brought on this point of policies, which again does not stand because the policies were not working is why these terrorist organizations arose, because minority rights were being violated. Whereas on our side of the house, we brought up a post-motion world and a minority rights argument where we actually showed you, which again were not counted because all of these depended on us actually putting a terrorist organization in the driving seat, which is not the case, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, like we mentioned earlier, if this motion was to be put forward, the government would actually try to protect all rights, and inadvertently, if all rights are protected, there would be no need for a terrorist organization to rise, which is why we see that which is why we can see that we've clearly won the clash point on human rights. Moving onwards, which house actually upholds democracy more? Okay, they brought in this point of legitimacy. Okay, again, all of their arguments were based on this whole legitimacy. They brought on this point of fair play. Okay, now then, let's just keep in mind that they never brought up the fact that the government actually killed double the amount of people as the so-called government proclaimed terrorist organization. Okay, they completely ignored the fact that they killed, and as soon as you bring that point in, all of the points that they said so far are invalid. Why? Because they did not consider that the government actually considered mass genocide double the quantity as this organization. Okay, where is the fair play if the government is killing? Okay, and then as on our side of the house, okay, we brought in this argument on the motive of the government. Still no substantive rebuttal to that, which is why it still stands. Okay, we told you all what is the supposed motive of the government. It's supposed to fulfill democracy, uphold human rights, and protect all minorities and ethnicities. And as we can see, this is what the government has failed to do. And in doing so, they've even gone as far as to kill innocent civilians. This is why we see that at this point of time, this is why this certain terrorist organization is more legitimate than the government. Okay, and then again they brought on this whole point of policies, saying that just note that on your side of the house, just because you bring policies does not mean how they will just suddenly magically disappear. Okay, how they will still be there. They did not give us an answer for that. It's too late for them to give an answer now. And even if a new government comes, this will still be the case. Okay, having said all that, I urge the judge to side with side proposition because we clearly value rights more. We clearly told you which side is more legitimate. We proved to you why, giving you facts and figures, and this is why we believe that you should side with side proposition. And with that, I'd like to conclude my case.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now I would like to invite the opposition whip to rest the substantive case on their side here.
Could I just have 30 seconds, please?
Sure.
Can I be seen and heard?
Could you be a little louder?
Yeah, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Preferred POIs through chat pronouns he, him. That being said, starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, our argument was never that the Yemeni government was amazing, nor are they justified in doing whatever they want. Our argument was that they are legitimate because they are democratically elected. That does not mean that they have the ability to violate any sort of right that they do want. That being said, I want to make two strategic observations with proposition's case. Firstly is how still 3 speeches down the line, they fail to understand that when they legitimize, when they say that the Houthi are more legitimate than the Yemeni government, they need to defend the idea that they are held accountable, that the Yemeni government takes over government in this instance. This is because, as my second speaker already told you, if a certain country has supposedly violated more rights than another, if a certain governing system was violating more rights than another governance system, then the one that did violate more rights is going to be held accountable under a court of law. Meaning that in that instance where that government is held accountable in this proposition's logic, the Yemeni government is held accountable. In that instance, another government to take over, most likely the Houthi government. This means that they have to defend the idea that they are unable to run a properly democratic government. This means that we are legitimate. All our claims insofar are still legitimate in that the Houthi are unable to run a proper country, in that they would probably disregard regular, proper democratic ideas in for things such as for whatever ideas they want to push. Secondly, is that they contradict a majority of their case in saying that we are illegitimate, that the Yemeni government is illegitimate because they violate certain laws, but they are only democratic. That we are illegitimate in saying that, or the Yemeni government is legitimate because they were democratically elected, yet they violate more laws. Their argument is that the Houthi government is also democratic, that a certain government has to be democratic, that the Yemeni government has failed in being democratic. Therefore, the more democratic version is the Houthi government, the Houthi terrorist organization. This means that they themselves concede that, yes, the Houthi government, the Houthi terrorist organization has done illegitimate things. They have done harmful things towards the nation. They have killed a lot of individuals. By this logic, they contradict the majority of their case inherently. That being said, this debate has come down to one question, and that is whether or not, which government holds more legitimacy. They make 3 claims on this point. Firstly, is that the Yemeni government has violated the people's right to life. I have 3 responses to this. Firstly, is that the Houthi organization, the Houthi terrorist organization, has done the exact same. The info side states that the Yemeni government has killed twice as many individuals as the Houthi terrorist organizations. This means that they have also violated the right to life. I would argue that according to their logic, democracy is democracy, and rights need to be upheld regardless. This means that the Houthi government, by their own very same logic, is also illegitimate. And again, if their logic there is that the Houthi government is an organization that is only labeled a terrorist organization, and it is not one that is an actual terrorist organization, I don't see how I think that further delegitimizes the Houthi government, the Houthi terrorist organization, as a form of government, as it means that they are held similarly accountable for violating the rights of people, violating the basic rights to choice of certain individuals, the right to life of certain individuals. Even if that is true, they are unable to prove that the legitimacy of a government is based on this one statistic that these individuals have killed twice as many people. This inherent idea that they are more legitimate for this one reason, the reasoning as to why they did that may have been because the Houthi government was pushing on them, the Houthi government was putting foot soldiers on them in order, and they had to defend themselves in that instance. The reasoning behind that number existing is unknown insofar as it has not been clarified within the debate. This means that they cannot base their entire argumentation and base all of their logic under this one statistic itself. But secondly, is that the Yemeni government has violated the right to expression, making them illegitimate. This does not harm the legitimacy of a government, as there are loads of governments even now that do this. Even though this is bad, we agree, yes, this is something that government should not do, but that does not delegitimize democratically elected governments. Yes, they violated certain rights, but they were still legitimately elected. They were still they still went through the same democratic processes in order to become elected and in order to become the governing body of that nation, making them therefore legitimate and democratically elected governments. It is the fact that they were legitimately and democratically elected that makes them legitimate. Even if this is not the case, they cannot guarantee that the Houthi government will not do the same. This is a government that is based on around minority rights. This is not based on minority rights. It is because it is extremist government based on one group of individuals. This is what the Houthi organization consists of. Therefore, they are unable to guarantee that the other sorts of organizations, the other sorts of races and groups within these people that are not part of this minority group are able to have the same sorts of abilities and freedoms that these people are going for would have if the Houthi group is given legitimacy. This means that the Houthi government is also illegitimate, even more illegitimate, as they are not democratic in the same sense. The argument cannot be that these governments are democratic, yet when they are inherently undemocratic, this is a terrorist organization. The third claim that they make here, and this is the final claim that they do make here, is that the government has only labeled them a terrorist organization. As my second speaker has already told you, they are a terrorist organization because they are an organization that goes to extreme methods in order to get their point across. They are extremists. They are an extreme terrorist organization. They are similar to other terrorist organizations that do the same. They hold the same similarities. They are not a government organization. They are a rebellious, revolutionary terrorist organization. Even if this was not the case, I think this further undermines the legitimacy of this government, as it means that they are held to the same standard as the Houthi government, meaning that even they did violate those rights to the same extent, yet they are not democratically elected, meaning that they are even more illegitimate. Here's the weighing for this clash. Even if we concede that to some level that the Yemeni government is illegitimate, because of the fact that they have been democratically elected, and proposition claims that it is important to have a democratic election and that democracy is important. It is due to this fact that they are democratically elected, they were legitimately elected, and that the Houthi government has done the same, had the same issues that the Yemeni government has, that the Yemeni government is more legitimate than the Houthi government. For all these reasons, the motion must fall.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now I would like to invite the opposition reply speaker to give the reply speech. Here.
Am I audibly and visibly clear?
Yeah, clear.
Yeah, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I honestly thank side proposition in this debate for making our job a million times easier. They come out and tell us the legitimacy is basically when people vote democratically and stuff like this. It's on this basis that our cases, and we tell you this is why government that is being voted is more legit. Moving on. There are two main clashes in this debate. The first being whether the Houthi, the most important clash, the Houthi is actually legitimate over the government due to the amount of killings and the statistic scores. And the last one being which side actually benefits the people. I'll deal with the first one first, right? Basically, when we look at it, whether the Houthi or the government is going to be better, it's clearly here the government, right? They are more legitimate because of the fact that they are being voted. what we already tried to prove to side proposition throughout this case is that legitimacy is this cornerstone in anything. It's this thing where legitimacy, like side proposition for speaker mentioned, democracy and all that. This fact sort of solidifies our case further and sort of proves to you by the government that is there is more legit over the Houthi. Just because there is just because the government sort of might have had more killings due to crossfires in Yemen wars, because we have to first take in as my first speaker mentioned, Yemen was a country that sort of had wars, right, with Iran and all that. And these killings were most probably stuff that happened due to crossfires and all that. Because of this, we can see the Yemen government isn't solely blamed on. And another fact that we have to understand is that basically the Yemen government is democratically voted, which gives them all the legitimacy needed. The second clash, which side will actually benefit the people? On our side, if the government makes a mistake, they can go to court, which inherently will send a new government. Just because a new government comes doesn't mean the old miserable stuff will be continued. It means that new rules and legislation will be put forward that will benefit the people. This doesn't happen on their side because now it's a terrorist organization. As my third speaker mentioned, they use extreme methods in order to push forward points. They use extreme methods in order to make sure that people understand one point, and this is inherently wrong. Therefore, we believe they don't have a lot of legitimacy. At the end of the day, this debate had to tell us exactly who has legitimacy. I believe side proposition did a okay case, but the thing is, it isn't their fault, right? It's sort of the Houthis' fault. It's because it's at the end of the day, they aren't voted by anyone. They aren't sort of given any proper legitimacy, as side proposition likes to call it, and they aren't going to be benefited. Basically, when we look at it, our paradigm is sort of our counterfactual has a legitimate government where it's voted in, democratically voted in, as well as people sort of know who's there, and this sort of legitimacy exists in our paradigm to an extreme extent where side proposition can't claim this. Panel, when you take in the points and when you weigh in everything given by the two sides, you can clearly see that what we gave you shows that the government is more legit over what they gave you. So proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now I would like to invite the government reply speaker to give the reply. Here.
Yeah, am I visible as well as audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. Give me a second. We're starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we as intellectuals, we as debaters debate to learn, debate to understand, right? Proper opposition had me thinking on exactly what is legitimacy, because it was a clear sort of debate. It was what was debated about, which inherently isn't supposed to be a debate. So let me quote you on the Oxford Dictionary, right? Legitimacy is being fair and acceptable. In simple words, so that opposition's minds could comprehend, right? It is not taking down one government and bringing a terrorist organization. It is not giving the terrorist organization this green card to go and rule whatever they want. All of my 3 speakers from the get-go itself clarified this misconception, which is inevitably was going to happen, which as we sort of anticipated, and it did actually happen, which sort of crumbled their case, right? There was 3 things that opposition argued upon, which was nitty-gritty rather than the debate which needed to be argued upon, right? The first one was the clear misunderstanding on what legitimacy is, right? We told you, no, we are not granting them this green card to become the government. We brought you in a post-motion world argument, whereas this government, when Houthi is sort of declared more legitimate than the government, it will cause conversation, it will cause debate rather than crossovers, rather than fires. It will cause peace, as Isira, my second speaker, explained, right? Whereas in their paradigm, as my third speaker explained, they have become terrorists. They have become an extremist organization because policies did not work. They have become an extremist organization because debate did not work in status quo. That is why we are making this change to sort of hold them more legitimate rather than the government, so that it could happen in the post-motion world. Because as my third speaker explained, nonetheless, if another government comes, this organization is still going to exist and the effects would be detrimental. Right? So we sort of engaged with this whole misconception, right? The second thing that they sort of brought in was this whole one statistic. So it is very hard for them to believe and giving justifications. Okay, that is not inherently the debate. And even if it was the only, even if there were more statistics, the debate should be hypothetically assuming that this is the only statistic available. That was the premise of this debate, and they completely forgot regarding that. Okay, the third nitty-gritty that picked on rather than debating on the actual scenario is that this government is democratically elected, hence they are purely legitimate. Right? We brought in several comparisons about Hitler, about North Korea, about Iran. They're literally replicating Hitler's over here, giving us this justification as to if this people was democratically elected, they're somehow completely legitimate. Right? This is what these are the small points that they brought out, challenged us with, and then we countered them. Right? What is this debate about? This debate is about on this logical comparison on which of the two entities are more legitimate than the other, right? As I told you before, the government has this inherent obligation. The government has this motive to sort of uphold people's right, to sort of ensure the equality before law, whereas the Houthi organization doesn't inherently have this obligation, right? Hence, I told you it is not justifiable for the government to violate people, right? Because as they themselves conceded, the government should be a completely democratic entity, right? Hence, we believe that we have won this debate as a whole because we didn't have misconceptions and we actually engaged on the premise of this debate, understanding if this organization is legitimate or not, right? That is the logical comparison that was sort of made, right? So we brought in three arguments as a whole. Number one, on the motive of the government. Number two, the minority rights. And number three, a better post-motion world, because you need to understand which side is more democratic and thinks about the post-motion, which side sort of like secures people's rights more as a government rather than the other, right? So we believe that we give a new fundamental justification, substantive analysis as to how we as proposition are sort of safeguarding democracy, safeguarding sort of rights more, right? For all those reasons, I believe that proposition has won this debate.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Thank you so much, everybody, for the debate. And I would like to request all the panelists to join me in the ads room so that we can deliberate.
OC has an announcement to make. Some of you might have realized we have experienced technical issues here, so that you probably find it difficult to join other breakout rooms. So here's what we want to do. Every other, only the chair and the panelists stay here. Everyone come to the main room. And when the adjudicated and the panelists are done with their deliberation, they to come to the main room and give the OA. Is everyone cool with it? So like only adjudicated and panelists should stay here. Everyone else come to the main room. Because participants can't access breakout rooms right now. There's an issue going on and we don't want to be in the entire meeting.
Sure, let's do that.
Again, I repeat, other person, please leave this breakout room. A reminder to adjudicated and the panelists, send the ballot to the OC. The OC will announce the winner and then we will invite the chair to give the OA.
Let's give speaker scores as well, since this is a final, or like just the verdict.
Just the verdict is enough.
Yeah, perfect.
Once again, every other person who is not an adjudicated panelist, please leave. Okay, wait, I have to forcefully remove people here. Wait. Observer and also the speaker from the proposition, please leave. Okay, fine. Two observers, please leave. And the OC members here, now you should leave. The two OC members here, please leave. The remaining OC member, please leave quickly. Oh, okay.
Recording in progress.
The adjust room. I think maybe the host is able.
We are not gonna assign the adjust to the,
I think they're in rooms used.
yeah, they're gonna be room series, and then they're gonna decide on the verdict inside room series itself.
Okay,
We are not gonna assign them.
okay, look, what we can do is maybe we can make Akil co-host, then she can go probably, right? That would work, right?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, I'm gonna make you co-host so you can access the breakout room. Can you now go to the room CEO, Saki?
Okay, let me try. Give me a minute. Still not able to.
What do we do now? Okay, Aki, can you send your OA as a voice message in the Edge group?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Look, the panelist Akhila is actually experiencing some technical difficulties, like, because of the technical difficulties, she can't join this room. So what we're going to do is this: she will put her OA or her verdict on as a voice message on the WhatsApp group. Please check that. Does that work with all of you?
Yep, we just need to know the verdict of Akila.
Okay, she will put it as a voice message in WhatsApp group.